welcome only, even though we haven't even put a question mark at the end of the title. I hope we're going to have a really interesting session. I think we will. We've got great people here up on the panel. So what are we talking about? Well, since the French Revolution, really, we have divided politics into left and right, and our political parties with it. But these categories are increasingly being challenged, aren't they? And as Brexit has made clear, the divide between left and right is not always apparent, or indeed even helpful. So is it time to move on to something else? Are left and right the antiquated legacy of an era that is no longer relevant? Or are there perhaps alternatives that would be better descriptions of our current politics, and which might help us improve and transform political debate? And goodness knows that needs doing, doesn't it? Does the distinction between the progressive left and the conservative right remain the central issue of our time? Or perhaps there's something more interesting and more original that we can find to replace it. That's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, as with all of these sessions, I'm going to ask each of our guests here on the panel to talk for just 2 or 3 minutes about their views on the subject, and then we're going to debate it. And we have a fantastic panel for you. On my right here is Chantal Mouffe, who is a world-renowned political theorist and a professor at the University of Westminster. On my near left, David Goodhart, who was the founder and editor of Prospect and the author of The Road to Somewhere. And on my far left, not politically necessary, Rory Stewart, who I suppose is reluctantly an ex-Conservative MP. You will have all seen his amazing pitch to become leader of that party. So I'm going to start with Chantal.
I was supposed to be the third one. Wow. Okay, all right. Well, it's quite interesting that the first question is, do we need a new divide? In fact, I would have expected more, do we still need a divide? Because divide, this is a question that very often is posed. You don't know. In fact, if you think of Tony Blair, Macron today, no, en même temps, we don't need anymore a divide. So I find it interesting that the question is that really the new divide. Well, I mean, we're going to address that, but first I want to indicate, I'm going to speak here from the point of view of the political theorists, because this question that we are asked can be approached from a sociological perspective, from the perspective of political science, and the question is going to be posed in very different ways. So I want to tell you from where I'm speaking. And as a political theorist, I think we need to understand that when we speak of what is the political, and I think this is really at the center of the question, there are basically 2 understandings. There is the associative conception of the political. Political is, you know, the acting in common, the feeling of liberty, in which we should all try to agree, establish a consensus that includes everybody. And then a dissociative view. Say, no. Politics has got conflict with antagonism. It has got to do with the fact that the people is divided, the fact that we are always dealing in collective identities, and that this always requires the determination of us them. Because one of the big questions today, I feel, is that people say, us them, no, we should, why do we need us them? Why can't we all agree? You know, and of course, this is what the associatives say, that is, for instance, the view that we found in the third way of Tony Blair and Anthony Giddens, today with Emmanuel Macron in France, en même temps. Well, I think that this is definitively a very dangerous conception, because it's eliminating the conception of the political, about conflict, antagonism, so when they arise, you don't know to deal with them. So according to the view which I developed, which of course is a dissociative view, the question for democratic politics is not to try to arrive to a consensus without exclusion, but because that would need us, it does not have a demos correspondent, and I think that's possible. What we need, and for me this is the central question, and this is where I want to put the question of the divide. How are we going to create the institution which allow, when this conflict arises, that it does not take the form of antagonistic conflict with friend and enemy, because this, of course, is very dangerous for democracy, but what I have called in my work an agonistic struggle among adversaries. That is, adversaries, that opponents who know that they are never going to be able to agree, but who respect the point of view of their opponent and accept, to fight with democratic procedure. So I think that what this means is that instead of divide, I don't like the term divide, because I prefer the term frontier. But according to dissociative view, politics is always creation of us, them, and so there is always a frontier. Because divide is something which really does not, for me, is not political. And I think the question fundamentally is that what kind of frontier is the one which is more conducive to a vibrant democracy? Because, and I think we are going to discuss that in detail, some frontier, or in fact are not really frontier, because for me a frontier is a divide which is political, in which we really have conflicting view of the common good. And it's very important to see that some construction of the divide, if you construct them in religious terms, in ethnic terms, that is not conducive to democracy. And this is why personally I'm going to defend the view here that we need to keep the left-right divide, because this is the divide of the frontier, which is the most conducive to a vibrant democracy. But of course, the whole question is all this left-right frontier is imagined and constructed, and because there are some ways in which it's really not something which is useful. For instance, if we think of left-right in terms of sociological categories, then of course, this is what political theory do normally. Also, they have this group, that's the left. No, of course, that's not useful. But I want to propose a frontier between left and right conceived in axiological principle. There is a question of values. They are always in a pluralist society, which is accept the pluralism of values. There will always be competing values, but values that is important to respect. And this is in fact the difference between left and right. For instance, Norberto Bobbio, in a nice little book, he said, finally, the basic difference is that the left is always defending equality, while the right is less interested in equality, and they tend to defend liberty. So I think that this is why it's important to accept that there are always, and I speak of an agonistic debate between people who want a society in which equality and social justice are going to be the main driving force, and I think this is for me what the left is, and another one, which is the right, in which basically they accept a lot of inequality. So this is, I tell you in advance, the position that is going to be the one of difference.
Thank you.
Good.
So I think we can begin with the fact that many of us intuitively, implicitly feel that there is a lacking centre in politics, and that there is an increasingly divisive, polarised society. So John Curtis, for example, the polling guru from Sterling, argues that British opinion used to be a bell curve with the votes in the centre, and it's now a U-shape with the votes on either side and nothing left in the centre. There are two responses to this. One of them is that this is almost an inevitable feature of the nature of modern discourse, partly fueled by social media. In other words, really, this phone in my pocket and the things that it enables encourages the creation of a public that comes together very quickly against something. That a line runs from the Arab Spring through to Brexit. Part of that line is the general story that there is, to quote my friend David, who's just accused me of living in a bubble, that there is these people living in a bubble. People living in a bubble, okay? And it's the classic language from that thing, right? You guys live in a bubble. The story is that there are a bunch of people who are out of touch, living up on the top of a little pyramid, who don't really understand what's going on around. And this becomes a very powerful weapon. It doesn't matter whether you're in Egypt, at those people. it tends to be a negative program. It's very difficult to translate this movement, whether you're talking about the Arab Spring or Brexit, into a positive program of government, because it tends to be an objection towards a particular group. Now, the question then is, how inevitable is this? Is there something about the modern world, something about this machine, which means that any attempt to create a centre ground is doomed? And in fact, actually, the professor suggested that it is in the very nature of democratic politics that an attempt to define a centre ground of consensus is anti-democratic. Her implication in her agonistic vision is that actually a truly liberal democracy involves different positions, people dividing lines between them. She likes the divide between left and right, she doesn't like any other divides, but she basically believes democracy involves standoffs between one group and another. I think it is possible, though, to conceive of something more than simply what she was suggesting. So she was suggesting that the resolution to this is to think of a more dignified, courteous way of imagining that disagreement between the two sides continue, but that there are rules by which they play and they give respect to each other's positions. I would argue that there is a way of being a Trumpian anti-Trump, that there is a way of using this machine to advocate not for the positions of the right and the left, not for the positions of no-deal Brexit or Remain, not for the positions of equality against liberty, that there is a way of using this to connect to the local. And the more things are embedded in the local, the more plausible it is that through practical work, through action, you can discover the virtue of moderation, right? The virtue of avoiding the extremes, the energy that comes from the intermediate states. And I want to conclude on this. Heraclitus, since we're talking about philosophy, is very interested in the idea of harmony. And what Heraclitus points out is that harmony comes not by losing the opposites, but by suspending the power of the opposites. He talks about harmony in relation to a musical instrument. The sound of the string comes from the string being suspended through the tension of the bow. I'm even more interested in harmony through the bow itself. So the centre ground, in fact, is pulling off those two ends, drawing the patriotism from one, the sense of liberty of the other, and then the sense of compassion or social justice the other, in order to create that form. And what gives it its force is that it operates in the realm of reality. Thank you.
David.
Yes, well, I mean, what is the centre ground is always a pretty central and contested part of politics, and I think our democracy has been sort of shifting in a way. I mean, I think obviously left v right hasn't disappeared, but we've shifted in the last 20 years or so, 25 years, from a politics that is primarily socio-economic to one that is at least partly socio-cultural, but the socio-economic has been partly eclipsed by the socio-cultural. And I think that's a good thing. People aren't suddenly feeling and thinking things they didn't feel 20 or 30 years ago. It's just that these things either didn't need to be expressed or weren't expressed. So I think what's been happening recently is not a crisis of democracy, it's democracy working. We are, though, we have a kind of disequilibrium at the moment, and we haven't yet found a new equilibrium. I think we probably will over time. Left v right identities have become weaker, obviously. I mean, I think you mentioned John Curtis. I think he says that something like nearly half the population, nearly half the voting population now identify primarily with their Brexit position, Leave or Remain, and only 9 or 10% still identify primarily with a party political identification. But it is a very complicated story, because I think we're seeing a lot of convergence actually on left v right issues. I mean, to put it very crudely, the middle class has become less right-wing and the working class has become less left-wing in the last 20 or 30 years. And there's actually a very big consensus around a huge number of issues. I mean, if we do eventually resolve Brexit, I think that we will see that there's a huge consensus that's emerged sort of in the undergrowth in the last 3 years over things like essentially socialising adult social care, building a whole lot more public housing, investing a hell of a lot more in FE colleges rather than sending everybody to university. But if that does happen, that will be partly because of a response of the political class to the Brexit vote, and a feeling that the socio-cultural issues, the so-called left behind people, have not been included sufficiently in the conversation. So we've got convergence on left and right, but divergence on the socio-cultural issues. And we don't yet have a kind of fully worked out language or set of concepts to articulate these new cultural divisions. I don't think, I wrote a book a couple of years ago, Marianne mentioned, in which I talk about people who see the world from anywhere and people who see the world from somewhere, the kind of mobile, educated, people who value openness, autonomy, rooted, less well-educated people who tend to value security and familiarity. It's the sort of achieved identity of the anywhere.
Sorry, can you speak up a little bit, please?
Okay. Yeah, we don't have a fully worked out concept for describing the new cultural divides, and our parties are sort of reforming themselves around these new cultural divides. I think one of the things that almost all of the opinion and value surveys will tell you is that our politics has actually had a kind of hidden majority for much of the last few decades. And it's the hidden majority described by the American political scientist Daniel Bell. He was asked sometime in the 1980s or 90s, he's dead now, but he was asked by a journalist, what is your political credo? And that's, translating slightly, he basically said, I'm a market-friendly social democrat in economics, I'm a liberal in politics, and I'm somewhat conservative in social and cultural matters. Now, the left went off in a culturally liberal direction in the 1960s and never really came back. The right went off in an economically liberal direction in the 1980s and has partially come back. And I think, if you look at actually the Tory manifesto in 2017, it's probably closer to that hidden majority than any party manifesto we've had. It was full of social democratic rhetoric. And I do think this is, my final point, I do think, in the longer run, our politics will become much more determined by sort of temperament in a way. You might say anywheres versus somewheres is essentially kind of liberals versus small c conservatives. And we're always going to have that divide. There are always going to be, if you have children, some of your children tend to be quite open and welcome novelty, and others are more sort of conservative and worry about change. We're always going to have those divisions, and I think politics will become increasingly determined by those things. But I think in the short and medium term, what this means for our politics is that we will, ruptions in the Conservative Party aside, it'll be easier for the centre-right to dominate politics than for the centre-left, for this reason, that it's easier, as we have just seen, as we saw in the 2017 election, as I think we will see after Brexit if it happens, it is easier for the right to move left on economics than it is for the left to move right on culture. And that gives the centre-right a really big inbuilt advantage, I think. And I hope that Rory will be part of the Conservative team that takes advantage.
So I do remember, David Blunkett, when he first became Home Secretary, saying to me, Marianne, you won't believe how right-wing I am. So there is a bit of a tradition on the left, actually, of being quite socially conservative. So let's now talk about whether this distinction between left and right is of the past and whether it's no longer relevant to contemporary politics. So Rory, David has pretty much said that the old-fashioned left and right divide has at least partly dissipated and has been replaced by what you might call either anywhere and somewhere, but a lot of people talk about the open-closed divide, people who are open on social issues, immigration, gay marriage, that sort of thing, and people who are socially conservative. Do you think post-Brexit, assuming there ever is a post-Brexit, and we've stopped labelling ourselves Leave and Remain, do you think that might replace it?
Well, there's certainly a lot of evidence for David's view. My political bet is against him. But to give it credit, you can certainly do an analysis of the British voting public and their views on Brexit, where you can divide people between open and closed. I don't recognise it in myself, and I don't recognise it in my own voters and current. I am somebody who is romantic and traditional about the Queen, about the British Army, about our history, about our tradition. I love small sheep farmers. I'm a conservative, right? I mean, that's where I come from. I'm obsessed with history. But at the same time, I am absolutely appalled by the push for a no-deal Brexit. I'm very relaxed about issues which really rile up many people in the Brexit party. And I believe that my tradition, which is broadly speaking a tradition of one nation conservatism, or on the Labour side, I suppose, is roughly associated with New Labour, is a perfectly viable way of articulating a way of being British. And it has a certain genius in it. And I think the genius is that actually we tend as a nation, historically, to resolve our conflicts through compromise. That the religious wars of the 16th century, the fight between Puritans and Catholics, were resolved through a fudge called the Church of England. But the civil war between Parliament and Crown was resolved by a fudge called constitutional monarchy. And that the theorists of open and closed would have tried to suggest that that was impossible. They would have tried to suggest that constitutional monarchy was the worst of all worlds. You know, why on earth would you want this? As a Republican, this is offensive, there's a hereditary principle. As a monarchist, this monarchy has no power, there's no point having it anyway. So I think, for me, I'm betting hard that there is a different way of being British, that you can feel a lot of the romantic attachments to many of the things that made myself and my family conservatives, while still feeling a deep sense of shame about poverty, while still feeling very, very relaxed about things that really anger the Brexit party. That's my view.
Yeah, I mean, Open v Closed was actually a division articulated by Tony Blair in a speech, I think after he stopped being Prime Minister. And I agree with you. I think it's a pretty useless division in a way. Or it's a very self-regarding division. Because it's basically saying, look, we're the kind of modern, open, cool people, and there are those horrible people who want to live in a closed society. Have you ever met anyone who wants to live in a closed society? No, I haven't. But a lot of people do feel the forms of openness that we've had have not been in their interest. And this is I think, Rory's slight fallacy of the centre ground. I mean, he wants to recreate Blairism or some Tory version of Blairism, and it is precisely that has created the political alienation that led to Brexit, Trump and European populism. We have got to adjust our politics to take account of these neglected feelings. Essentially, in my language, the anywheres have been running the show, and they have run the show for the last 25 years in their own interests. Our societies have changed enormously in that time. Since the end of the Cold War, we've become so much more open, economically, socially and culturally, and much of that has been wonderful, but there are lots of people who feel that it hasn't worked in their interest. The supply chain really did move to China, factories were closed down, and then a whole lot of people were brought into the country to compete against them in the service jobs they were doing, and they felt that the national social contracts were being neglected. All of these things, I think, are perfectly legitimate feelings that were not recognised by the people in London. And so we've had some pushback against that, and a new centre is emerging that needs to take account more of those somewhere priorities and intuitions, and I think it is. Because I think, when people talk about Brexit politics, they're talking about doing adult social care, building more housing, investing in FE colleges that have been...
They're talking about immigration, right?
Yes. I just want to bring Chantal in here. So, the political system has to adjust to take
well, no,
account.
but first I would like to say, I do agree with David. For instance, I do believe also that I think, by the way, the Brexit is a sign of a democratic crisis here, and it's the consequence of the third way. I mean, this is why I'm really amazed when people say, no, the solution now is to come back to centrist politics. No, we must be aware of the fact that all the opposition to the situation, which is created by Brexit, is a consequence of 30 years of neoliberal hegemony, and particularly of the fact that the Labour Party, which in fact normally should have been the one defending the interest of the popular classes, has abandoned the popular classes. It's all really identified with the interest of the middle class, and then of course you've got all those people who feel completely left aside and seen, by the way, from the other one, the deplorables, and I think this is really what the problem.
So do you think now that we have a much further to the left Labour Party and a further to the right Conservative Party, that this is actually better for democracy?
I think that's better for democracy, yes, absolutely. Of course, the question is that, let's say, it again, after in my work, I have classified the time of the New Labour as a post-political era, in which basically there was no possibility for citizens to exercise their democratic right, because when they were going to vote, there was finally no difference between center-right and center-left, and this is left, and we are going to speak about that in another question, some kind of this blurring of the line. People feel disempowered. They lose interest in voting. Why should we go to vote if in the end this is not going to make any difference, And I think that the fact that today we are in a situation in which there is what I would call a return of the political. There is a moment in which, some kind of agonistic debate could be possible. Of course, is the question, and I think that's of course about this, let's say, the us-them. This is important. Remember, for instance, when they were saying, we are all middle class, so we should be able to agree, and I think that is fatal for democracy in Britain. I think it's very important that people feel, politics is something that mobilizes passion. And how can you mobilize passion for a situation in which you don't have the possibility of choosing? So I think that it is important that there is this return of the political, but this return of the political, of course, can lead to more authoritarian form of democracy. If the Boris Johnson, with this project is able to win, I mean, this is not going to be good, but in my view, at least, for British democracy. So it is this what I call, we are living in a populist moment. Populist moment which really is a resistance against this kind of center politics. And it opens the way to two different solutions. So let's say we are in a very interesting moment, but dangerous also, because it depends who is going to be able to really find a way to articulate in a progressive way the demand of the popular sector, which has been completely abandoned and left aside by the people at the center.
Okay, let me as a person of the center, right, against these two positions, let me try to defend it. I think that it is true. There are a lot of angry people. There are a lot of angry people who vote for Corbyn. There are a lot of angry people who vote for Boris. There are people who may not manifest it through anger. They may manifest it simply through their vote. And it's clear that an enormous number of people, the overwhelming majority, I suspect, of this country, feels disenchanted, disenfranchised, fed up with the politicians, fed up with the system. But my point is that their position, in the end, is fundamentally destructive. It's a revolutionary, destructive position. It is not a constructive policy for government. Now, it can be dressed up as such. So if you are a theorist of Boris Johnson, or you are a theorist of John McDonnell, you can provide an account where you say, no, it's not true that we are destructive. We have a very positive political program. This is our view on housing. This is our view on FE colleges. But what you're drawing on, the tap root of this thing, is often something quite different. If you actually notice what happened in the parliamentary debates, everybody, when we were debating the leadership, was trying to say we must get beyond Brexit, we must talk about housing, we must talk about education. In the end, it was all nonsense. That entire leadership fight was about one thing and one thing only, which was really about Brexit. And in fact, probably the craziest thing in the BBC debate I found was 10 minutes into it, Emily Maitlis interrupting me and saying, okay, enough about Brexit, let's now talk about our different views on education, employment, where we all issue very similar sounding platitudes about all these kinds of things and nobody gets anywhere, right? So I think we have to begin with what we actually believe in, right? What we actually think is right for the country. I absolutely agree there seemed to be a strategy in 1997 of sounding like a centrist, because that's where the votes feed. There is a strategy today that appeals to many of my friends who were centrists in 97 and who now are lining up behind Boris, of believing the votes are on the extremes and they need to play to them. But my question, what is it you actually think is right for this country? What is your view on how you're going to keep the services going? What is your view on immigration? What is your view of the role of the state? And on those things, I do not think, certainly within my own party, people are being as clear or honest as they can be. They signal, they whistle, they suggest implicitly that they have various kinds of views which are totally at odds with their expressed views 2 years ago on all these kinds of subjects. And the one thing missing in this type of politics is always the word how. They're always telling you what they want to do. They are never really telling you how they're going to get there, or what sacrifices, or what problems are going to occur along the road to that destination.
This idea that the extremes have taken it. And I mean, Marianne, you were using, you were talking about, Labour's gone off to the left. Well, I think that is indisputable. But the idea that the Tories have lurched off to the right, I think is an expression of the poverty of our language, precisely because we don't have the concepts to talk about the new socio-cultural politics. So they want to implement Brexit. I mean, is that right wing to want to implement something that people have voted for and then voted for again in an election in 2017? Of course it's not.
Chantal in the Home Office, for instance, I mean, she's indisputably more right-wing in her attitudes to crime and punishment.
Yeah, but Tories overall are miles less right-wing than they were 15 or 20 years ago. They believe in equality. Yeah, just look at what they say. Yeah, this is what everybody believes, I know, but it's actually not true. I mean, 20 years ago, most Tories, austerity was supported by the Labour Party. It was, and versions of it have happened in other countries too. We did have a massive deficit that had to come down. And they're now taking an opportunity. Tories are now taking an opportunity to pump money massively into the public sector. This old centre ground that Rory wants to go back to doesn't exist any longer. We've got to produce a new centre ground.
Well, you were telling us it did exist, and there was a huge consensus between the parties.
Well, there is on left-right issues. There is a big consensus, not between the parties because Corbyn has taken over the Labour Party, but in the general public, there's a big consensus on socio-economic issues now, and actually, and I think the Tories partly reflect that. Where it all went wrong was actually back in 2010. It was when George Osborne and David Cameron thought that it was fine just to repeat new Labour policies, particularly in socio-cultural areas. And Osborne used to boast about this. He sort of said, Tony Blair was the master. He had established a new centre, but that new centre was crumbling at the very time when they were taking over, because it hadn't taken into account the feelings of large parts of the population on lots of things that are quite intangible and difficult things to do with community.
Okay, but can I press you on this? Because
yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about these socio-cultural liberal values, suppose that politics starts to split between social conservatives and social liberals. Does the socially conservative government come in and ban gay marriage? And what happens?
No,
what happens to the gay couples who are married? Does it come in and say?
But that's a very good point. That's a very good point. Okay, so this speaks to what you were talking about, Rory. So George Osborne and David Cameron do gay marriage. Okay, this is a Conservative Party doing gay marriage. Yeah. That is, they do gay marriage, but why didn't they also? So that satisfies, the liberal end of British opinion. So why didn't they, at the same time, balance the vote and do something for the more traditionally minded? There are a hell of a lot of more traditionally minded small C conservative people out there as well, and they used to vote. They used to vote Conservative, and they stopped voting Conservative. The whole point of having a two-party, first past the post system is that the two parties congregate everybody from left and right into their vote. And the Tories took their eye off the ball. They allowed UKIP to grow up to their right, and we ended up with Brexit. And I blame George Osborne for that.
Chantal.
We should not mix the question of left and right with the question of Brexit, because they are different things. It's true that today, you could say, most people, if you go to issue of they divide, is more than the Brexit issue. But I don't think that this is a good thing for democracy. And this, you can't imagine that one should say, okay, no, the for the coming years, the frontier is going to be between the pro-Brexit and the anti-Brexit, the Remain. But by the way, in fact, this is so that it cut across left and right. There are people on the left, I mean, Lexit, for instance, who are in favor of leave, you know. So we can't just say that it's clear. So it cut across that. And today, obviously, through the question of mobilize more passion among people is the question of the Brexit, but it's not going to stay there forever, hopefully. And so I think what is important here, and I would like to come back to the point I was making before, when we have this, you know, opposition, this frontier between precisely different strong opinions, what is very important is to impede that this struggle, this opposition will take the form of a friend and enemy opposition. That is something that would be very bad for democracy. And I think it's very important that, and it's a question of having the institution, the procedure, the two camps treat themselves as I propose to call adversaries. Now, adversaries recognizing the legitimacy of the demand of the others and trying to find, I'm going to say not really a question of compromise, because it's not, okay, we are all going to agree on some kind of wishy-washy center, but try to say, we are going to accept some procedure, we are going to fight, and, accept the right of our opponent to defend their history, because I think that this is what is central for democracy, not establish an agreement, a consensus, is to what I call that, to transform antagonism into an agonism, impede that the two opposed groups will really negate the right of the other. And I think that there is a certain danger today, and obviously it's much easier these things to happen when you have, for instance, a divide between Brexit and non-Brexit. Because there is really no possibility there of recognizing, or let's say no possibility, it's not really true, but it's much more difficult, to find a way in which you can accommodate the position. Personally, I mean, I know that people are not interested, but I think that given the situation today, the only solution would be a soft Brexit. Because I think that the worst would be that one of the camps would say, we've won, and unfortunately the people are really very divided on this issue. Okay. So a soft Brexit will be, nobody's going to be happy. Yeah? Brexit, they say, that's not really Brexit. The other ones are, not. But at least nobody is going to be able to say we've won. And I think this is what is important.
Let me take on from that, because I think this is very important. I am passionately in favour of a Brexit deal, a compromise. I think it's really, really dangerous that people are trying to see this country in this U-shape, and everybody's being put into a Remain camp or a no-deal Brexit camp. Right? The reason why I voted against the no-deal Brexit is not just that I think it would be unbelievably damaging and unnecessary thing to do to our economy, but I believe you will be storing up years and years of rage from Remain voters if you delivered a no-deal Brexit, and it would become one of the great founding myths for the next 30, 40 years. A Tory no-deal Brexit would be perceived in the way that Mrs. Thatcher is perceived in a great deal of the North East today. It would be one of those issues, right? Ditto, I think that were you to go down the Lib Dem route of not holding a second referendum and just going for full revoke and Remain, then all those people who voted for Brexit thinking the elite hate us, the elite will ignore us, they think they're too good for us, confronted with people saying, you're not even going to have a second chance of it, you were just wrong, we're going to ignore the referendum, we're going to Remain. That also will set up decades of division, right? But the problem is, it is very, very, very difficult to generate the language around this kind of compromise because people don't feel the votes are there. I mean, my entire party leadership campaign was predicated on trying to get a compromise. And of course I failed. I failed dramatically because people pointed out nobody really is interested in supporting this kind of position. And the pollsters who do this open close, or sometimes somewhere anywhere, or sometimes diversity wealth divisions, keep saying you're going to be killed if you try to locate yourself in the middle, you have to decisively choose. Are you going to do what Dominic Cummings, I believe, is trying to do, which is decisively wrench the Conservative Party round to create a base in Hartlepool, Sunderland, Bishop Auckland, trying to pick up effectively white signalling, by signalling not just that they share their Brexit positions, but by signalling that they share all the other positions that David is gesturing towards. And I think the final thing I want to say is, look, of course these things are difficult. When I voted for gay marriage, I made a lot of people in my constituency very, very angry. That's true. Right? It's true that many, many people in the country, and the vast majority of people in the Conservative Party, did not want gay marriage. Right? But there is a question about how I, as a politician, respond to that fact. Particularly when, if we now go 5 years forward, people are now completely ambivalent about the issue of gay marriage. I mean, it turned out that many, many of those people... Well, if you look at the polls, currently it doesn't really feature in people's views at all. It's neutral, right? So people who were ferociously angry with me for voting in favour of gay marriage are now perfectly relaxed about it 5 years later. And I'm not sure what the implication is of what David is saying. Yes, it's true, of course, I have many people in my constituency who have deep views, anti-immigration views, anti-European Union views, pro-no deal views, and did have an anti-gay marriage view. But the idea that I need to just accept this as inevitable, speak to them, produce policies that...
Something for them, why not? Isn't that the kind of balance that we need? The
Well,
compromise we need. Okay, something on the family. Make it easier for one parent, either the mother or the father, to stay at home when children are young. Why don't we, unlike most continental European countries, we do not allow couples bringing up children together to marry their tax allowances, to merge their tax
So
allowances.
the answer is, I'm in favour of that policy.
Well, we should have done
But that would not be experienced by those people as being a policy of the level of their views on gay marriage or immigration. This would be seen
Well, you've
as
got to
a,
sell it
as,
as
as,
that.
as,
That's a political skill, you sell it as that.
as a cute technocratic fix. It's not going to deal with the problem of those attitudes, those values, and that outlook.
But there was just no appetite to do it anyway.
Okay, right, we're going to move to questions because I can tell there are so many people here who are going to want to ask questions. I'm going to take three, I'm going to take them in threes, and could you please put your hand up, wait for the mic to come, and then we'll do your question. One over there, these two in the front, and then I promise to go to the back. Put your hand up, and the mic will come, I think. And then that top over there.
I was wondering if there's also something missing from the centre-right, and it's actually surprising that it's missing. So when you had Blair, probably you had Clinton, and then Cameron, uniting the successful against the rest, you then have the idea, well, we can moderate the pain of that. Yes, it's meritocracy, the successful will rise. Moderate the pain of that by a little bit of help. But the thing that the centre-right were not good at, and I'm surprised because it should be one of Rory's core values, they weren't very good at dignity. There was a sense in which they did not think about the dignity of those people who were left out of that equation. So it's not just about helping, it's not just about making sure people have enough to have services and so on. And I'm surprised that that's missing a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman here in the front. Put your hand up, please. Yeah.
Thank you. The thing that depresses me a bit about this debate is it all feels like it's just about politics and what people say about things. And Rory's the only one that mentioned or implied competence and to actually address the how of things. And I wonder whether a centre might emerge of people who are just able to get things done in a very practical way that can be respected. I think of Peru, which is a basket case in many cases as an economy, but through 5 administrations they have stuck to the same macroeconomic policy and achieved 20 years of uninterrupted growth. There are some things that just should unite people as being just well done and as probably as good as anybody could make it. So what about competence in politicians?
Okay, and if you could pass the mic to the man in front. Yes, you have your hand up forward, didn't you?
I think just heard Rory advocate Jeremy Corbyn's position on Brexit, didn't I? You know, negotiate a new deal and then give everyone a vote on the deal versus remain.
I wasn't. No, I favoured Jeremy. I was very strongly in favour of Jeremy Corbyn's position when it seemed like he was a quarter of an inch apart from Theresa May's position. He believed in a negotiated soft Brexit deal. That's where I was in favour of him. When he starts...
And I should say I like the centrist position. I don't mean to criticise that.
Was that your question? Yes, okay, good. So we want to talk about dignity and competence. Chantal?
Yeah, well, in fact, I want to address the question of competence particularly because well, it's interesting to see Rory, for instance, clearly belongs to the view that I have called the associative view. You know, the center, we should all be able to agree and why we construct politics below us and them. And of course, this leads precisely to the idea that, there are political issues are basically technical issues. You know, if there is really no agonistic debate, no real choice, then of course, obviously, the more competent, the expert should be the one who decides. But that is a very dangerous position, because I think this is the origin of the disaffection of many people, because we are going to listen to you, okay, so you can't answer that. Has this issue, if you say no, let the people, the competent, who should the expert. I think this is precisely the problem with the dominant conception of democracy today.
But also you've got to decide what you're going to do before you do it competently or incompetently.
Well, yeah, no, but that means, political issue can't be reduced to technical issue.
That's what I'm saying.
There is something in which people need to have a choice. I come to my view, politics is a both conflicting conception of the common good. And then there is no center. The center is not a position. The center is the negation of this dimension of the politics.
Okay, let me let's try to situate this within a real debate. Let's take Brexit. You can take this view, and the implication of it is that no deal Brexit is just the expression of the popular will. Right? It's a political values choice. And that my attempt to argue, technocratically, that it is crazy, right, is irrelevant. Politics is not about technocracy, it's about a choice of values. Okay? I disagree. Right? Values removed from technocratic calculation are not values at all. For something to actually be good, virtuous, interesting, or of any power at all, it needs to be rooted in reality. It needs to be possible for me as a politician to get beyond saying, we have two incommensurable points of view. We don't really debate. You want a no-deal Brexit, it's just a point of view. No, you are wrong. You have not read the withdrawal agreement. You do not understand the tariff barriers. You have not thought through the kind of negotiation you're going to have to do with the United States. And I want to have that debate with you. And democracy is about having that debate, because democracy, in the end, the only point of the debate is if it is possible for me to convince you. If the whole thing is simply an expression of my cultural values, forget it. I don't want to have anything to do with it.
Dignity, and I think it's
well, I come around to that. I don't disagree. Okay. I went to I went to an economic presentation in the city the other day, and just to qualify what Rory said, the economic forecast with a no-deal Brexit
no, we're not here to,
is
we're actually not here to talk about
he did just talk about it.
I'm
we're going to grow at 2.2% in 2021, even with a no-deal Brexit, according to these guys. Anyway, so the truth is we don't know what's going to happen.
I'd like you to answer.
Okay, right. But I do think there is a question. I mean, I absolutely agree. both with the technocracy question and with your question, that of course politics has got to be more about why as well as how. I mean, the reason why we've had these eruptions in our politics is because it's been too much about the technocratic how. That was what the sort of the kind of Blairite centrist technocratic politics was about, and we've had a revolt against that, and we've got to acknowledge that to some extent. And the gentleman over there, I think, is absolutely right, that it's curious that modern liberalism, and indeed the left, finds it really difficult to talk about some of these issues, to do with identity and security and belonging. But we've got to talk about them, and we've got to find new political concepts to deal with them. Because a lot of these issues are to do with meaning and psychology and esteem and honour and things like that you were talking about, and that's absolutely right. And a large part of what Thomas Piketty rather naughtily calls the Brahmin left and the merchant right, as he describes it, simply sort of don't get these things. And they're having to get them now. You know, that's why they're talking about investing in FE colleges and socialising adult social care. By the way, I work for a think tank. We just produced a report on it's a centre-right think tank. We were advocating socialising adult social care. And guess what? It had a preface by that bowl-hatted monster, Jacob Rees-Mogg, in favour of socialising adult social care, for those of you who think that all Tories are extreme rightists. So I think you're absolutely right, that we've not had the politics of why, and Tories, and centre-right and centre-left, have both failed in this respect to give us a politics of why, and people have revolted against it.
Okay, 3 more questions. Right, I'm going to take the man at the back there, and the man here, and the woman. Sorry? No, I was just thinking this woman here, but I'm afraid the man put their hands up first, as usual. It's actually true, it is actually true. So wait, all right. There's the man back. We're going to have this one.
Can we just imagine for a minute that Brexit does actually finally get done? What's going to happen next? Is populist nationalism in the UK just going to go away? Are Rory and Boris and the Mog all going to go out for a drink? Is peace, love and happiness going to break out?
Right, and then gives the man here. Put your hand up, please.
Marianne, you alluded to what I thought this debate was about, which was whether there was a question at the end of the introduction, is this the end of the left and the right? Which begs the question, is there a third way? Is it something we've been overlooking? The one thing I keep hearing is Brexit, 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 which is fundamentally, do we think locally or do we think as a smaller planet? Now, my children were yesterday demonstrating. They see this planet as being a very small and increasingly small place. They are internationalists through and through. And they are tired of hearing about what this country needs. Again and again they're told one English child is worth 20 in Africa. They don't agree with that. Now you can call me wishy-washy liberal. I actually believe that is a growth area. Now what are you offering that's different?
Okay, I'm going to ask the next question, just because we're very short of time.
I'm still working this one through, so it might not be the most clear comment and question, but we're talking about is it a loss of left and right? And in many ways, I just see the rise of the right. And we've criticised centrism and Blair for being a basis of where we are now. Actually, I look back longingly to Sure Start and Muslim initiatives, and I just think, are we making our judgments on what people say or what people do and the consequences of what they're doing? And the consequences of what has been done by the right through austerity have been dire for all members of the population. For me, that is the basis of the loss, rise of populism and the loss of people who would ordinarily have been on the left.
Right, thank you. And there was another woman, apparently you had her hand up at the front. Who was it? Well, anyway, there's one there. Yes, I'm going to take your question too, please.
Hi, thank you for everybody who spoke. But I suppose kind of unsurprisingly the debate is centred around the left and right in Britain as opposed to maybe wider afield in Europe. And my question is, do you think the electoral system in Britain some way it forces the extremes of the lefts and the rights as opposed to a pure system in other European countries? Thank you.
Right. All very good questions. I'm going to ask each of you to answer just one of them, each. One of you is going to have to do two. And then I'm afraid we're going to have to bring this to an end, so very short, please.
Yes. I agree that it's not only what people say, but what do they do. And in fact, by the way, I take this opportunity to answer to Rory that when I speak of values, I don't think about values as always embodied in practices and in policies. You know, so I'm not saying, they founded the value. No. This is not simply to say, but also what to do or to implement those values, those practices. And I'm afraid that, if we look at the case of the third way, we realize that they might have said a lot of things, but in very positive, looking very kind of progressive, but in fact, they were very, very complicit in the establishment of neoliberal hegemony in Britain. Of course, it was begun by Thatcher, but when Tony Blair came, we were kind of all expected that he was going to break, but he didn't do that. He just, in fact, managed a bit more humanely with a little more redistribution what exactly established by Thatcher. And for me, the problem that we have today in Britain, and it's not only Britain, because it's the same all over Europe, we are seeing the consequence of 30 years of hegemony, of a revolt of that, which is a populist revolt, and I think that in that sense it's good that they are putting that into question, and it's not coming back to centrist politics that we are going to solve the problem.
Okay, thank you.
The question posed by the woman about European politics, I think it's absolutely right to raise that issue, and I think it is absolutely not a coincidence that the two most extreme populist events have happened in Britain and America, where we have two-party systems and first past the post. Those systems have proved to be brittle. They kind of snapped and produced this reaction. I mean, as I said earlier, I think partly a legitimate reaction to the over-domination of one set of values and one broad political economic class, but nonetheless, the system hasn't been able to absorb that voice. Continental Europe, on the other hand, partly because of proportional representation, they've had populist voices in their parliaments and national assemblies now going back 20, 30 years. In 6 or 7 EU states, they've had populist parties in governments, and there have been some ugly moments, but broadly speaking, the direction of travel has been towards domestication, towards moderation of these views. Many of the populist parties have split between the true believers and the moderates, and they've been far more absorbative. I mean, I can't even remember whether I voted in our referendum on PR in 2011, but if I had done, I'd have voted to keep the existing system. I now wish that I had, well, whatever I did vote, I voted that.
I'm going to stop you there. Good point. But Rory, you've now got to answer, I'm afraid, what happens to populism after Brexit, and how we absorb the internationalism of the younger generation. Very briefly.
Okay. Well, what happens to populism after Brexit? Look, I'm afraid this is that Brexit is now increasingly associated with a sort of Trumpian worldview, and there's no accident that the exact voters that are being targeted, as far as we can see in Dominic Cummings' new election campaign, are exactly the Trumpian voters. And it's true, of course, that a government going in that direction can promise to spend a great deal more. The fact that they're promising to spend a lot more on health, education, policing, doesn't change the fundamental mindset of that drive. Trump spends money, he likes spending money, and Boris apparently likes spending money. They'll probably spend money while cutting taxes. They're not going to, so what they're actually going to do is balloon deficit and debt in order to finance this initiative. But that itself is perfectly compatible with populism. It's a form of populism. And I think the difficulty here is it possible, and this doesn't matter whether we're talking about climate change and international activity, can we recover a sense of reality? Can we recover a sense of truth while combining it with the energy and the anger and the desire for change which is driving these populist movements? Do we have to allow Boris or Jeremy Corbyn to go away with fairy tales, whipping up a very, very reasonable view that we all share in this room, that things are not good, that there's a lack of dignity, that there's a terribly shameful things in our society, but not to allow people to take that insight and turn it into a program for something that will ultimately damage us, divide us, and pit us against each other. In other words, in relation to this question about Jacob and Boris, are we going to allow them to release a drunken gorilla and by putting a monocle and a top hat on it, make it suddenly seem acceptable? Thank you very much indeed.
Chantal is saying, what a pity we didn't have more time, and I so agree. A fantastic image to end the debate on, though. And if you're interested in this, which you clearly are, there's at 4 o'clock in the international tent a debate on the benefits and pitfalls of modern capitalism, which I suspect will extend a lot of what we've been talking about today. You could have tea with Claire Short at 3:45, or you could come and listen to me talking about feminism, also at 4 o'clock. All our fabulous panellists I'm about to thank will be in the bookshop now for you to go and talk to them. Yes?
But quantum mechanics to set theory, positivism to deconstruction, philosophical realism to philosophical relativism. It seems the paradox lies at the heart of our most revered theories and the cornerstones of our thought. Are these paradoxes evidence that our theories are wrong? And is it essential that they are overcome? Will we one day find our way out of the hall of mirrors if we reason hard enough? Or should we accept that paradox is an unavoidable consequence of the limits of human thought and a hint of the greater world that lies beyond the limitations of human understanding? Joining me to... you can't hear? Can we improve the volume? People at the very front. Can people at the back hear us? See, there's a paradox for you. Can you hear us? People in the front row can't hear us. We'll work on that. Joining us to discuss are Hilary Lawson. Hilary is a postmodern philosopher and critic of philosophical realism. He is the author of Reflexivity, Postmodern Predicament and Closure. Sophie Allen is a lecturer in philosophy at Keele University. Her research focuses on metaphysics and the philosophy of science. Her book is A Critical Introduction to Properties, 2016. And Slava Žižek, joining us by the miraculous paradox of quantum physics, both in his kitchen in Ljubljana and in North London right now. He's a Slovenian-born political philosopher and the international director of the Birkbeck Institute of Humanities. So, let's get things started. We're going to approach an initial question. I'm going to hear from all 3 of you, and then we're going to develop our thoughts as we go along. So, Hilary, I'm going to start with you. Are paradoxes evidence that our theories are wrong? And is it essential that they are overcome?
Well, I've sort of got to answer yes to both of those. I think it is an indication that there's something at least amiss with the way that our theories operate, and I think it's essential that we do something about it. First of all, let's just be clear what we mean by paradox. This isn't just a bit of a confusion or a misunderstanding. It's a contradiction which applies to the claim itself in such a way that you cannot think the claim. So the classic example of this is the Cretan liar paradox, which in its contemporary form is probably most easily expressed as there is no truth. Now in the claim there is no truth, it seems pretty straightforward. But it's not straightforward if you apply it to itself. Because if there is no truth, does it mean there is no truth, that there is no truth? Or in order to understand the sentence, do you in fact have to imagine it to say there is a truth, that there is no truth, in which case you cannot think that idea. Now many people are in a situation where they want to say there is no truth, so it's pretty important that here is a claim which is at the centre of their thought, which cannot be thought. You actually can't think it. So what do we do with that? Well, if you look up paradox in Wikipedia, it'll tell you this is a bit of a technical problem, and it's possibly been solved by Russell's theory of types and Tusk's hierarchy of languages. I don't buy either of those things. I don't think it's a logical problem. It's found at the heart, I would argue, of all of the major philosophical systems of at least the 20th century, and for a good deal prior to that. And it comes in lots of different forms. So Russell has it with his mathematics, Wittgenstein had it in the Tractatus. He was trying to say we're trapped in language. Well, if we're trapped in language, you can't obviously say in language that you are trapped in language. There are many different forms of this. It also applies to, I would argue, materialism. So the idea that there is only material, which there are many people who want to hold this position. The problem with the position that things are material is it means that the theory is material as well, and a bit of material cannot be true or false. It just exists or it doesn't exist. So in the context of materialism, the theory can't be true or false, it just is. So there are lots of other versions of it. Derrida, post-structuralism, they all have this self-referential problem right at the heart of the puzzle. So what's going on? Why do we find this at the centre of our theories? Now, many people just dodge this. It's just too difficult somehow. They can't work out what a solution is, so they ignore it. I, as a postgraduate student at Oxford, became rather obsessed with the problem, and I've had a go at trying to build an account which deals with that problem. And the sort of answer that I would give is something along these lines. That we imagine, or Western thought is in general imagine, that we are describing a world of things out there, and it's more or less accurate. But I think that idea that we are describing a set of things is a mistake. And that what is a better way of understanding that would be to think that the world is other. It's not like language at all. Language divides things into things, and it divides them into characteristics. But that's no reason to think that the world is divided into things and characteristics. And what I think language is doing, thought is doing, is it's a way of holding the world. It's like a metaphor for the world. And we hold the world in these ways, and they enable us to intervene. And they enable us to intervene in ways we can correct and make it better. But they don't enable us ever to describe the other that's out there. There's always an infinite gap between our ideas and the world. And it is in thinking that we might be able to close that gap and actually say how it is that we get into these paradoxes. Now, of course, there's one last thing I want to say, which is this account that I've given you, this story of closure. You might say, well, aren't you claiming that that's true? Well, I would say the whole point of the theory that I put forward is to try and account for why it is that we are able to make sense of the world and intervene in it, even though our thoughts and language don't describe it. So the account that I've given is an attempt to describe why it's possible to describe the world, why it's possible to say things and intervene in the world without it having to be true.
Very tantalising. Thank you, Hilary. Sophie Allen, are paradoxes evidence that our theories are wrong, and is it essential that they are overcome?
Okay, I'm sympathetic to quite a lot of what Hilary said there, but I'm going to disagree on some things. But what I'm going to do philosophically here is actually give you two views, two opposing views. And one side says that, okay, our theory, if you think your theories are about the world, if you think your theories are actually true, if you're a realist, so if you see a theory of physics and it says there are a certain kind of subatomic particle and they exist and that's all that exists for physics to work, you think, oh, those things are really there, then it's going to be a serious problem if paradoxes arise in your theory, because that is actually telling you that paradoxes arise in the world. That somehow, if your theory is correct, if your theory is the right one, that implies that actually the world is somehow contradictory. Now, that is a very difficult thing to understand. There are a couple of philosophers who accept that, who would actually quite persuasively argue that we can accept the existence of that some contradictions are true, or that some paradoxes could actually be manifested. Now, I'm not going to be one of those philosophers, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there, because we're being very sort of, oh, we can't have these things. The natural reaction is you say, well, we can't have such a thing, that, you know, the set of all sets. If you think about the set of everything has to contain itself. But if the set of everything contains itself, there's another set of everything, so that has to be contained in the set of everything. And then if you get that set, you've got an even bigger set, and the set of everything now contains the set of everything, which comes, etc. So you start off, so it doesn't have a fixed set, there isn't a fixed cardinality of the set, as we'd say. So there isn't a fixed number of things in that set, because it just explodes, basically. So, on the one hand, if you're a realist about theories, if you think that our theories are actually about the world, the appearance of paradoxes is really problematic. On the other hand, if you take the view, it's perhaps similar to what Hillary's described, but also other views, you could say, well, okay, our theories are trying to model the world, they're trying to explain the world. They may not actually pick out what's actually in it. They may say things that they may predict and explain what's going to happen, but they won't actually tell us what the world contains. So if you're told in a theory of physics that there are quarks, that doesn't mean there actually are little things called quarks. It's just helpful to talk about the world as if there are. Somehow the world behaves as if they're quarks. Theory. Because you can say to yourself, okay, something we're thinking about the world isn't the right way of thinking about it. We've started out with definitions. We start out at common sense level, looking at the world around us, looking at tables and, you know, kind of the sun and things like this, and trying to work out what the whole universe is made of, and what the world, how things work and so on. That's a very, very big process, and that's a very difficult thing to do. And we've brought with it our sort of common sense human concepts and common sense human ways of looking at the world. And that's not likely to be the way that we actually ultimately end up explaining it. And physics and other sciences have come a long way with sort of generating different ways of looking at the world and different ways of conceiving of things that are counterintuitive, that don't really fit with common sense, but they do fit with empirical experimentation. So when experiments have been done, that sort of, you know, we could say, okay, well, we think that there must be certain things happening in quantum theory because when you do the experiment, this is how it works, and we can predict what's going to happen. And that is something that, when you get a paradox appearing, you can actually look at things and say, okay, we're making a definitional mistake, we're making a conceptual mistake. So, for instance, with the set of everything, or alternatively, there's Russell's-Barber's paradox, which is some might know this anyway, but you're on an island, or there's an island, and on the island there's one barber, and the barber shaves everyone who doesn't shave himself. Now,